I raised my sister's son for 11 years after cancer took her, sold the only piece of jewelry my late husband ever gave me to help pay for his first semester of college, and did not hear his voice again for 4 years once his company was worth 9 figures. Not until the night he called me sobbing at 2 in the morning, asking me to come sit with a hospital bed I never should have had to learn the room number for. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming amazing videos. My name is Barbara Whitmore, and I am 71 years old. My younger sister Denise was 34 when she died, and her son Marcus was 7 at the time, a quiet, watchful little boy who had already spent the better part of a year watching his mother grow smaller in a hospital bed while doctors used words neither of us fully understood. Denise never married Marcus's father, a man who left before Marcus was old enough to remember his face, and when the cancer finally took her, there was no question in my mind about what came next. I had no children of my own at the time beyond my daughter Renee, who was 9, and my husband Harold, a steady, quiet man who worked at the county water department for 30 years, looked at me across our kitchen table the week of Denise's funeral and simply said, "We'll make room." We made room. Raising Marcus was not the tidy, sentimental thing people imagine when they hear a story like this one. It was hard in ways I did not fully appreciate until I was already deep inside it. The nightmares he had for the first 2 years, waking screaming for a mother who was not coming back. The way he flinched at loud voices for reasons I only partly understood. The school meetings where teachers gently suggested he might benefit from counseling we could barely afford on Harold's salary. I worked double shifts at the hospital laundry service for the first several years, not because I minded the sacrifice, but because there was no version of loving that boy that did not require it. Renee and Marcus grew up more like siblings than cousins, sharing a bedroom for the first 3 years until we managed to add a small addition onto the back of the house. And I remember thinking, watching the two of them fall asleep some nights on the living room floor in front of the television, that whatever grief had brought Marcus into our home, love had made a real family out of it. There was a particular winter, about a year after Denise died, when Marcus's nightmares were at their worst, and I remember sitting up with him most nights until nearly 2 in the morning, holding him while he cried for a mother he was slowly learning he could no longer call for. Harold would sometimes find the two of us asleep together in the rocking chair by morning, and he never once complained about the toll it took on either of us, simply covered us with a blanket and started the coffee before heading off to another long shift at the water department. Marcus was a serious child, quick with numbers in a way none of the rest of us were, the kind of boy who took apart the toaster at 9 years old just to understand how the coils worked and put it back together better than it had been before. I remember driving him to the library every Saturday morning because our small local branch did not carry the computer programming books he'd started requesting by the time he was 12, and the librarian at the bigger branch across town eventually started setting books aside for him before he even arrived, calling him our little engineer with a warmth that made my chest ache with pride every single time. Harold took a particular delight in Marcus's curiosity, spending long Saturday afternoons in the garage teaching him how engines worked, how to fix a leaking faucet, how to read a blueprint. Patient lessons that had nothing to do with computers but everything to do with the kind of methodical, careful thinking that would later define Marcus's entire career. When he got into a state university on a partial scholarship at 18, I sold the small diamond pendant Harold had given me on our 10th anniversary, the only piece of real jewelry I have ever owned, to cover what the scholarship and my modest savings could not, and I never once told Marcus I had done it, because I did not want him carrying that particular weight alongside everything else he was already carrying. Marcus called every Sunday during his college years, without fail, telling me about his classes and his roommates and, eventually, about a small software project he'd started building with 2 classmates in their dorm room, something related to logistics tracking that I did not fully understand, but listened to with genuine interest anyway. He graduated with honors, took a job at a mid-sized tech company in another state, and continued those Sunday calls for another 3 years, through his first apartment and his first promotion and the early stirrings of the company he would eventually leave to build on his own. The company he started, Ledgerline, took 4 difficult years to gain real traction, years during which Marcus called less often but still called. It was in the 5th year, when Ledgerline secured a major investment round and then a buyout offer that made national business news, that something in Marcus's life changed in a way I did not fully understand until it was already well underway. The Sunday calls became bi-weekly, then monthly, then increasingly brief when they happened at all. He married a woman named Angela Price during this period, a sharp, accomplished marketing executive, and I remember meeting her for the first time at an engagement dinner downtown, watching her take in my modest dress with an expression she tried, not entirely successfully, to keep neutral. She was not unkind to me, not exactly. She simply looked at me the way you look at something slightly out of place in a room you have carefully decorated. The wedding, held 8 months later at a vineyard 3 states away, was the first real fracture I noticed. I was seated near the back of the reception hall, introduced during the toasts not as the aunt who raised him but as family, a word so carefully vague that several guests asked me afterward how exactly I was connected to the groom. The final unmistakable break came at what should have been a joyful occasion, the birth of Marcus and Angela's son, Elijah, 3 years into their marriage. I learned about it not from Marcus, but from a brief announcement Angela posted online. 4 years passed after that phone call in which I saw Marcus exactly twice, and where Elijah, a beautiful, watchful little boy, who reminded me achingly of Marcus at that same age, grew into a 5-year-old who called me, when he called me anything at all, Miss Barbara, rather than any word that acknowledged the blood we shared. My friend Loretta Simmons told me once, with the bluntness only a decades-long friendship earns, that some people get so afraid of where they came from that they mistake the people who loved them there for evidence of a past they'd rather bury. I did not want to believe that of Marcus, but as the years accumulated, I found myself less able to argue with her. I built a life around that absence. I threw myself into my church's meal delivery ministry, cooking for elderly members of our congregation with no family nearby. There was one Christmas during those fractured years I spent at Renee's house, my phone sitting silent on the kitchen counter, no call from Marcus arriving that day or the next. Renee took the phone from my hands and told me it was not my job to keep performing hope on a schedule that only hurt me further. The call came on a Tuesday night in early spring, my phone ringing at 2 in the morning with Marcus's name on the screen for the first time in longer than I could remember. Aunt Barbara, his voice cracked on the second word. It's Elijah. They found something. A mass. In his kidney. They think it might be cancer. And I don't know what to do. I don't know how to sit in a hospital room with a sick child. You're the only person I know who ever had to learn that. I told him I would be on the first flight I could book, and I was sitting in a hospital waiting room less than 18 hours later. Marcus met me at the elevator bank, looking smaller than I had ever seen him, dark circles beneath his eyes, hands trembling, as he hugged me for the first time in what felt like a decade. Angela thanked me for coming with a genuine warmth I had not heard from her before. The biopsy results came back 4 days later. Elijah's tumor turned out to be a rare but highly treatable form of pediatric kidney cancer, one the surgeons were confident they could remove entirely. The news dropped all 4 of us into a kind of stunned, grateful silence. I stayed 6 weeks, teaching Elijah the same card games I had once taught Marcus, humming the same lullabies I remembered from 30 years of raising children through hard nights. Elijah asked me questions about what his father had been like as a little boy, whether Marcus had ever been scared of anything, and I answered honestly each time, small, ordinary memories that seemed to matter enormously to a boy, only now beginning to see his father as something other than a distant, busy figure. Late one evening in the 3rd week, Marcus finally said the thing I think he had been trying to say since that phone call. I don't know how to explain the last 4 years to you in a way that doesn't sound like an excuse, he said. Angela grew up around real money, the kind where nobody talks about how hard anything was to get. And I think I got scared that if she really saw where I came from, saw you, saw the house on Fenwick Street, she'd see me differently. And instead of testing whether that fear was true, I just let the distance grow. I told myself I was protecting you from feeling judged, but really I think I was protecting myself from feeling exposed. I asked him whether Angela had ever actually said anything that confirmed this fear, or whether he'd simply assumed it. He admitted she never had, not directly, only a handful of small comments about different worlds that he had let grow into something much larger in his own mind. I did not rush to forgive him. I told him plainly that I had not raised him so that he could hide me once his life grew comfortable enough to feel embarrassed by its own beginnings. I told him Fenwick Street had not been a burden he escaped by outrunning it. It was the foundation everything else was built on. Marcus and I speak weekly now. Elijah calls me Aunt Barbara instead of Miss Barbara, a small correction that meant more to me than I expected. Angela has grown warmer too, though a certain formality between us may never fully soften, and I have made peace with that limit. Marcus surprised me last month by asking whether I'd speak at a Ledgerline event for local high schoolers interested in technology, introducing me to the room not as family in some vague way, but specifically as the aunt who raised him. It was a small moment, but it told me, more clearly than any private apology could, that Marcus had finally stopped being afraid of where he came from. I still think, some nights, about the 4 birthdays I missed, years I cannot get back regardless of how healed things have become since. I did not raise Marcus expecting gratitude. I raised him because that is what family does. I am simply grateful that when he finally needed reminding of that truth, I was still standing close enough to remind him.